If you examine our most highly promoted vocabulary, terms like philosophy, truth, justice, or freedom, you immediately encounter a structural problem. When challenged to define these concepts, the immediate academic instinct is to dig. We treat the word as a surface feature, assuming our job is to get to the bottom of it. This investigative instinct relies on a specific assumption that beneath the messy, everyday usage of a word, there must be a singular, unshakable essence, a solid bedrock that anchors it. But according to the essayist Bry Willis, this search for a definitive foundation is a category error. It misconstrues the very nature of the object under examination. Attempting to define these abstract terms by searching for their origin or strict literal meaning fails, because it mistakes a word's temporary stability for a permanent objective reality. Consider Martin Heidegger. To answer the question, what is philosophy, Heidegger relied on a method of linguistic retrieval. He attempted to define the practice by taking the word philosophia all the way back to its original ancient Greek setting, suggesting the older word contained a pure disclosure of the discipline. Willis points out the mechanical flaw here. A word's origin can show you where a practice has been, but it cannot settle what the practice currently is. To correct this error, Willis proposes the language insufficiency hypothesis as an alternative framework for interpreting our vocabulary. This hypothesis abandons the search for ontological bedrock entirely. Instead, it argues that we should map what he calls stabilization histories. To see exactly how we mistake analytical methods for true ontological discoveries, we can use a 4-part diagnostic grid. Let's start with the first quadrant, etymology. The first distinction is straightforward. Etymology is not ontology. Discovering a word's origin provides you with a historical genealogy. It shows a lineage, but it does not reveal a fundamental essence. If looking backward doesn't work, we try looking horizontally at how the word is currently applied. This brings us to semantics. Here, the rule is that semantics is not phenomenology. You can meticulously describe all the different ways people use the word philosophy, but cataloging those uses does not describe the actual lived activity, the intellectual pressure, or the encounter those uses point toward. Neither tracing a word backward through time, nor mapping its horizontal spread in modern usage, touches the actual reality the word attempts to name. Frustrated by history and usage, we often try to force an exterior boundary by writing a rigid definition. But a definition is not an encounter. When you categorize a term from the outside, you turn an active movement into a static object. Philosophy becomes a filing drawer to be inventoried, rather than a space to be entered. Which leaves us with the structural analysis of signs, or semiotics. The final distinction is that semiotics is not adjudication. Mapping a sign shows you how it orientates attention within a specific field, but a sign is just a flag planted in a swirling nebula. It cannot provide a neutral standard against which correct use can be finally judged. All 4 of these methods ultimately fail because they mistake systemic, structural analysis for the discovery of solid ontological ground. What these failures share is a single diagnosis. For this entire class of terminology, there is no frame-independent referential anchor. If a word's correct usage were settled entirely independently of our human framing, it would occupy what Willis calls an invariant limit position. But words like truth, justice, and philosophy do not sit in that stable class. They are persistently non-invariant. Their correct use depends entirely on stabilization histories, historical sequences of events that could have easily gone otherwise. These stabilization histories are built from the ground up, starting with layers of inherited, sedimented uses accumulated over generations. On top of that, institutional pressures force the term into a specific shape, establishing who gets to use it and in what context. Finally, pragmatic settlements are reached. The culture agrees on a working application, allowing the term to become authoritative enough to govern discourse. Yet, despite all this accumulated authority, the term remains inherently unstable. It resists permanent closure. Therefore, philosophical inquiry must stop demanding to get to the bottom of these terms. There is no bottom to reach. True inquiry does not dig for an essence. It meticulously maps the specific, contingent conditions that allow a term to maintain its temporary stability. The immediate philosophical paradox here is obvious. This critique is being conducted in the very medium it indicts. The words Willis uses to build this hypothesis, phrases like frame independent or stabilization history, also lack a neutral court to verify them. But this recursion functions as a Wittgensteinian ladder, a tool you use to climb, knowing you will eventually recognize its limitations. Acknowledging that our diagnostic language is built on contingent history demonstrates the exact point of the thesis. Attempting to exempt these analytical tools from the rules of language would be making the exact same false claim to bedrock. It would simply be Heidegger's error wrapped in foil. The absolute inability to step outside of language proves the core mechanical reality. No adjudicating position is entirely neutral. This diagnostic framework sits firmly within a broader historical lineage of suspicion toward linguistic authority. It echoes Friedrich Nietzsche's treatment of rigid concepts as hardened metaphors, whose original genealogy has simply been forgotten, and it aligns with Michel Foucault's demonstration of how discursive formations are stabilized entirely through the application of institutional power. Ultimately, this framework is not an attack on reality. It is not an anti-ontology claiming nothing is there. It is a strict refusal to support an ontology prematurely. True philosophical inquiry doesn't discover a hidden foundation. It rigorously discloses exactly why our demand for one was misplaced.